This week, we go back to the first time Ben Affleck played a superhero and had to go into rehab as we review the 2003 Daredevil.
As a boy, an accident took his sight, but gave him superhuman senses. Now, one hero will take on a new ally.
I didn't get your name.
I didn't give it.
To battle the ultimate enemy. Bullseye. Ben Affleck, Jennifer Garner, Daredevil.
I have to go. My bodyguard is here.
Your bodyguard? Rated PG-13, February 14th, only in theaters.
This is the Superhero Pantheon. On this podcast, we take one superhero film a week and decide whether it should be in the Pantheon, the pile of shame, or somewhere in between. My name is Jerome Cuson. You can find me on Twitter at JeromeC1985. You can find additional episodes of this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of your favorite podcast apps through the real world. We strongly encourage you to leave a 4 or 5 star review so as to help people discover the show and the great work that the folks at The Real World are doing. If you would like to interact with us or send feedback, you could do so in 2 ways. First, send an email to superheropantheon@gmail.com. Second, find us on Twitter at Hero Pantheon. My co-host for this week and every week will be Brian DeBrain. He can be found on Twitter at Brian DeBrain. Brian, this week we are discussing a Ben Affleck superhero movie that is not one where he is playing Batman, but we are going back to the original 2003's Bendevil, as I have come to call it.
Yeah, man, February 2003. I remember this quite well because I think it was like close to being All-Star Weekend around this time. I don't know why I remember this kind of weekend like very vividly, but coming out of the theater, I was like, okay, that was pretty decent, because all I can think about was like how it was kind of similar to Spider-Man, and I at least enjoyed that. And Ben Affleck I thought was cool, and I was pretty satisfied. 17 years later, after watching it for a second time, yeah, man, it's definitely a product of its time, because, I mean, God, there's so much lame alternative rock music in the background. The soundtrack is awful. They're playing Evanescence. Like, they play the exact 2 Evanescence songs that you're thinking of. The one with the piano that they play at funerals all the time in montages, and then the one where it says "Wake me up," and then yeah, it's a total flashback to 2003, a byproduct of its time. I don't think it holds up well, but that's because the Daredevil show is pretty much spoilers. So
yes, the Daredevil television show is no doubt much better than this movie. I didn't realize just how early 2000s it was. I mean, you definitely get that vibe right from the opening credits, and it's something that just continues on and on as we hear 2 different Evanescence songs, which they played really well at the time, but I'm not sure if they aged very well. So to kind of get into some of the history of this film, originally this was going to be a relatively low budget $50 million movie. However, during shooting in the summer of 2002, Spider-Man became a spectacular success. And the director, Mark Steven Johnson, who we will also be talking about next week, was asked by 20th Century Fox executives to enhance the film's visuals, and the budget was raised to $80 million. So we got $30 million more. And despite what you might think, despite how mediocre you think this movie is, it was very, very successful for its time period. And there's a couple of aspects to this. There is a director's cut that I think is a little bit better than the original cut, the movie that we saw in theaters. One of the most prominent aspects of that was a subplot with a character framed for murder by a corrupt cop and played by rapper Coolio. This was removed to make the film shorter, to get that lean 1 hour, 40-minute runtime, and also a PG-13 rating. However, Coolio was featured in trailers for the movie. Do you remember what other superhero movie Coolio was a part of?
Wow, you put me on the spot right now. I'm trying to think. 2003. Man, I want to say it was probably like was it superhero movie? That stupid comedy ripoff movie? Wait, that was 6 years later. That might have been too long.
We have reviewed it on this podcast.
Well, It's been so many episodes that I may have already forgotten. Is it
Batman
Pile of Shame?
Forever?
Okay, okay. Yeah, I was about to say, was it Pile of Shame worthy, but not quite there. But Batman Forever.
No.
Okay,
But
gotcha.
Coolio's superhero movie legacy is Batman Forever and Daredevil, which is amazing, Brian, because there is also one other person who is also in Batman Forever that is also in Daredevil.
Wait a minute. Who am I thinking of now? Because there's so many people in Daredevil.
Jon Favreau played a
All
very
right,
small role
right.
in
That's
Batman
right.
Forever.
And everything connecting. Everything's connecting.
I'm just bringing it all together. Also featured in this movie in a cameo role was Kevin Smith as he plays Kirby the Lab Tech, and you really realize just how much weight Kevin Smith has lost when you see him in this movie versus seeing him now. He actually looks younger in 2020 than he does in 2003. It was Kevin Smith who suggested Ben Affleck for the role of Daredevil. Smith, of course, has directed Ben Affleck in many movies from the View Askew universe, and wrote at least one of the comic book movies of which this movie is intended. So we got to see a little bit of Kevin Smith, who is somebody we have talked about very prominently on this podcast before.
Yeah, and this might have been, I'm trying to think of the timeline, but this might have been his most speaking role that's not Kevin, or that wasn't Silent Bob. I'm trying to think if he had any other roles at this time. But this was around the time that he started talking more, like well-known talking more. Like this is like right around the time I think of An Evening with Kevin Smith and all those 3 series of DVDs. So yeah, because I wasn't so used to Kevin Smith talking so much. You know what I mean? And then around this time, he started, doing more public stuff and social media, or no, not social media, but what the internet was doing at the time. So I was kind of shocked, to be honest, because I wasn't so used to him talking. But now he just never shuts the fuck up. But yeah, I'm this is a little sidetrack, but I'm glad that he's doing so much better. And he makes me want to eat Veggie Grill every day, apparently, because he eats Veggie Grill every day, and he looks incredible. So there you go.
And the other amazing thing about Kevin Smith is you mentioned his propensity for not talking. I remember listening to the commentaries back when commentary tracks on DVDs were kind of a big deal, and I definitely remember listening to some of those and almost being as entertained by his commentaries as with the movie that I was watching. So he's definitely someone, and I remember blind buying the DVD of An Evening with Kevin Smith because I was that excited. And if you have never seen An Evening with Kevin Smith, my guess is that you have a lot of time on your hands at this point, given where we are. So you should definitely go on YouTube or find it streaming somewhere and go watch An Evening with Kevin Smith. Regardless of what you think of his podcasting and his movies, An Evening with Kevin Smith is one of the best, I guess, stand-up, quote-unquote, specials that I've ever seen. Legit. There are just so many amazing stories, from the Superman spider story to so many other things. It's just amazing.
Yeah, shout out to him because he's probably the godfather of one of the godfathers of the modern day podcast, and that's kind of what a podcast was back in the day. So, what it was, or what it was becoming essentially, and he was kind of like at the start of it. So.
All right. Although Ben Affleck is a fan of the character, acting him out was such an unpleasant experience that in November 2006, Brian, I want you to pay very close attention. Affleck stated he would never reprise the role, having felt by playing a superhero in Daredevil, I've inoculated myself from ever playing another superhero. Wearing a costume was a source of humiliation for me and something I wouldn't want to do again soon.
Yeah, until you watch Christopher Nolan's trilogy and be like, okay, Batman's cool again. I want to do that.
And we all know how that worked out. Yikes. So one of the more controversial aspects of this movie was the fact that Michael Clarke Duncan was cast in the role of Kingpin. And people love the way that Vincent D'Onofrio played him. And I agree. I think it is a great, great performance, something that was sustained. I really like him in this role. It is unfortunate that he is no longer with us. I think he really nails the physicality. At this point, he was 290 pounds. He was asked to gain 40 pounds for the role in order to get the physique. Just everything about the character works. I think there are certain aspects of Kingpin that don't work, but I don't think any of that is an indictment of Michael Clarke Duncan. He is great, and it's really sad that we did not get to see him play this role again, perhaps, or get to be in some modern superhero movies, because he's really, really good.
Yeah, this reminds me of the casting of Fred Flintstone with John Goodman. Like, it's one of those castings that's kind of like just spot on, and I just felt like there's no one else. I don't think anyone has that size to kind of pull off a Kingpin like he did. Because I mean, when you think of Kingpin, it's all about that size, and Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse really emphasized that. And Vincent D'Onofrio is incredible as well, but he's a big dude. But just something about the way that Michael Clark Duncan was put together as a human being, the way that he can incorporate his physical size into his performance. I mean, that really, to me, like one of the cool things about the Green Mile is like the fact that he is such a big dude with a soft heart in that role, and I think he's great at playing that. And here he's gonna have to have that kind of like Grinch, kind of like evil kind of heart with the size. So that's kind of what Kingpin is. It's unfortunate that the role was kind of underwritten and kind of cheesy at times a little bit, but his performance, I thought, if he was given even better dialogue, or like the dialogue from like the Daredevil show, it would have been even better of a performance, and even better. I think he would have been on par with D'Onofrio, because like it just felt like he knew how to present that role and how to talk in that role and how to present himself, and he, you know what I mean? He felt like a boss in this movie, despite how cheesy some of the stuff he was saying was.
Yeah, it was definitely a little bit on the goofy side. Speaking of goofy, Colin Farrell got to use his Irish accent in this movie, and that was also very, very good. And he might be my favorite aspect of this movie, honestly.
Wow, we're on the polar opposite ends of that one, because second time around, whew.
Really, this is gonna be okay. This will be interesting.
Yeah, it was just like, wow, his performance was like way bad, I thought, and he's just like. It seems like he's having fun, but it just seems like he's just like directing himself in his own movie kind of thing. And I guess, we've talked about these kind of performances before in the podcast, but man, I just felt like it was so out of like place in this movie, considering like that's how some of the performances were in this movie. But man, it just was completely off the wall.
All right, let us get to the actual categories now. I have a feeling that we are going to diverge in a big way. Matt Murdock lets a random gangster get murdered by a train. That is kind of what he does. That is his first act as Daredevil. Is that something that happened? This random gangster, who of course was on what TV show, Brian? I know I'm putting you on the spot a ton on this episode, but this is one you should know.
I mean, I've seen that guy in a lot of different things, and I don't know, but I want to say he played a cop on something, or else I could be thinking of Christopher Maloney now that I think about it.
Of course, he was on The Wire, especially season 2.
Oh, okay, one of the Docs guys, I bet. Okay, I haven't seen season 2 since 2009, I want to say, but man, now that you mention it, that is my favorite season. I do remember that Doug getting drunk and then dying in the middle of the episode. That was pretty funny too.
So we get to see a little bit of Matt Murdock's childhood, and the way that he completely pervs out when Elektra walks in is just, boy, that has not aged well in the last 17 years or so. Is there something about Elektra that caught your attention? And no, I'm not going for the pervy answer. I'm actually asking you.
The fact that she's wearing weird contact lenses?
It's so weird, right?
Yeah, I don't know what they were going for. I don't know if it was to emphasize something in the lighting or whatever, because the lighting is pretty weird in this movie as a whole. But I don't know what they were going for. But the first thing, it's like you notice it completely, and I don't know if it was like this milky kind of tone or whatever. I don't know if it was to like reflect Matt Murdock's kind of weird, eyes or whatever. I don't know. There was a weird emphasis on eyes in this movie, and yeah, that was a weird kind of thing going on with her eyes.
Absolutely, that is for sure. Matt Murdock, some of the early scenes I think are a little bit on the rough side, and I don't know. Elektra's purpose, besides being fridged towards the end of the movie, is very unclear to me. I want your thoughts on this, because the playground scene, there is a scene when they interact with each other. She won't tell him his name because, again, Matt Murdock is being a complete pervert. And to me, they're clearly going for this Matrix vibe, but it came across like the basketball scene in Catwoman. Do you agree?
Those are the exact two scenes that I was thinking of when I saw that scene again. I was like, okay, they're doing the Matrix 2 right now with almost the exact same location where they had that playground scene with the fight. And they're doing the basketball scene with the basketball court in the background, except they don't play basketball. From the illustrious Catwoman, that movie that almost broke me. Yeah, it was just kind of weird, and I think that whole sequence threw me out of the movie a little bit because I was just like, okay, like at some point she's gonna figure out that you're like some sort of superhero or some kind of freak because you're supposed to be blind, yet you're standing on two different teeter-totters or seesaws and just fucking standing there balanced to shit. So I would have figured something was up immediately, but again, whatever, man.
I think part of the other issue for me is that I think we are at a kind of a peak Affleck point, and there's just something smug about his persona, especially around this time. And I think he's always kind of had that. But to me, there is a little bit of humility given everything that he has gone through in his life with his, his demons and struggling with gambling and drinking and all that stuff. But at this point, I mean, you are just seeing the peak of it, and he does not come across well. And I think some of this is the fact that it's in the writing, it's the way Daredevil's portrayed, but I just was overall not a fan of Ben Affleck's performance.
Yeah, I wasn't totally satisfied either. It felt a little too, I don't know, man. Like you said, smug and a little pervy at times. And then I just wanted him being more of that lawyer, that smart lawyer, and you get a little bit more of that in the director's cut, but not too much. Because there's some cool parts in the director's cut where he figures out that Coolio wasn't the killer, and they go inside the apartment and figure out all these things. And that's kind of the stuff that I liked from the Netflix series when he's being more of the detective and trying to figure things out. But when he's being like Daredevil and like being emo and going to his apartment and all that kind of thing, it doesn't really fit. It felt like he was just trying to be Batman. It felt like at times, but I don't know if that's because I'm just so used to him as Batman. But it just felt like they were going for that Batman dark, tortured kind of vibe. And I get that Matt Murdock is like that too, but I don't know, man. I think Charlie Cox did it way better. I think Charlie Cox kept it more grounded. Something about Affleck's performance feels a little too manufactured and a little too Hollywood, you know what I mean? And the fact that like they made Daredevil like this crazy acrobat that just makes no sense, because I just felt like why are you doing Spider-Man, all this Spider-Man high spots all over the place when it should be more of a grounded thing? Like the fight sequences I felt like that he was doing, I mean, we can talk about this later, but like it's just so ridiculous. And then add the cheesy lines it was giving out, and then stuff about justice and justice is blind. It just came off cheesy by then.
Yes, and I think part of it is the nature of these movies, and I think the way the 20th Century Fox will occasionally execute them. So Jennifer Garner, I'm very much up and down. I really like her on Alias. There's just something about every movie that she's done. I can't think of a single Jennifer Garner movie that she's the lead in. I think she's done some better supporting work, but for whatever reason, nobody besides J.J. Abrams and the crew at Alias was kind of able to crack how to use Jennifer Garner well, because I don't think she's used well here at all, because, again, her purpose is specifically to get fridged and to give Daredevil motivation for the final battle.
I keep wondering if they knew they were going to do the spin-off movie at this point, because they did, I mean, like with the history of the character and whatnot, and there's this history to her, but I don't know. I just felt like they were not really setting that up until, and then you see the thing at the end, the necklace, but then it was like, did she just die? Like, what does that even mean? Like, is she going to come back? And then, of course, there's no direct Daredevil sequel. You do the Elektra sequel, so it was kind of weird. Yeah, they should have established her as not being this new love interest and just established her as this, like, old flame that comes back, I think, and then that would have been more effective. Because then her presence would have been more effective, I felt like, because at the end of the movie, when he's going after Kingpin, he's like, you killed the two most important people in my life that I loved. And I guess he fell in love with her after meeting her like a week earlier, apparently, or something. Shit was weird on the timeline. So stuff didn't add up for that to pay off. You know what I mean? They should have established that it was a past love, like in the show, and work from there. And she was fine, I think. Like her performance was fine. She was solid. I think she was even slightly better in this than she was in Elektra, if that makes any sense. But yeah, I just wasn't feeling like the way that it was put together, pretty much. And yeah, I just felt like her. I don't know. I mean, yeah, they were a real life couple, but the chemistry in this movie seems kind of weird and like, I don't know, a little too, like I said, just rushed. You know what I mean? It just didn't make sense.
It definitely didn't. And we're spending an awful lot of time in the hero section. We still have two more people to talk about that I think are really important. Joe Pantoliano plays Ben Urich, and I'm getting an Alexander Knox kind of vibe from Batman '89. A lot of this movie kind of gave me Batman 1989 vibes. With some of the goofiness from Colin Farrell, kind of doing a Jack Nicholson impression. But Joey Pants is great, and anytime I see him in a movie, he is an utter delight. I think he's very solid in this role, and I just really like him. And similarly, Jon Favreau is a solid best friend, and you can see why he was good at Happy Hogan. He's just good at playing the goofball. He doesn't need to be the lead in the movies. It's very, very fun.
Yeah, Jon Favreau was the best part of this movie. Like, his performance was like the right tone that the movie needed. You know what I mean? Him, I forget the what's his name, the side character? I always forget. He's Foggy. Yeah. Okay, so him as Foggy really works well, and you know what I mean. And I felt like if he would have just taken over the directing reins of this movie, it would have been so much better, I thought. Because you can tell, like, in his head, the way he's performing, he gets the right tone of this movie. And he's, like, a delight to watch. You know, he's, like, the best part of this movie, totally. And then, you know, you mentioned Joey Pants. He's also the bad guy in Ready to Rumble. He was recently really great in Bad Boys 3, and I got to give him credit for that, because I don't like Bad Boys 1. I thought he was solid in Bad Boys 2, but I thought the whole full circle with his character in Bad Boys 3 really pulled it off. So he's got a lot of, you know, credit to his name. I remember in Sopranos season 3 being that asshole cousin that got out of jail or whatever, and then him ended up getting killed at the end. So he's done a lot of great stuff, man, and he was pretty solid in this for what it was, and him and Kevin Smith having that interaction was pretty cool. The only thing I thought was a little cheesy was him smoking and then throwing the cigarette and doing the Daredevil sign, but hey, whatever. You got to have the symbol, you know, right on the screen, so it is what it is.
All right, my hero score, I have decided to give this a 5, mostly because I really liked a couple of the side characters. I wasn't as into Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner, though. And for me, that's why I kind of gave it a 5.
I'm going with a 6, only because Favreau really saved it for me. Because I kept smiling whenever he said anything, and everything he was doing was great. So that really helped it for me. So.
All right, let's talk about the villains. And we start by talking about Michael Clark Duncan. I think he's a pretty good Kingpin. And he obviously should not have gotten as much shit as he got for being a black Kingpin. I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. It's absurd. He's very, very good in the role. Meanwhile, Colin Farrell is having an absolute blast as Bullseye. He is my favorite part of this movie. I'm definitely gangstered out by this point, given what we've been reviewing the last few weeks. And there's not a lot of pathos to the villains, and I think that is a major problem. But really, Michael Clark Duncan and Colin Farrell saved this category for me.
Yeah, Michael Clark Duncan, like I mentioned, was a great choice as Kingpin. Unfortunately, the dialogue that he's given is really bad sometimes, but the way he's looking straight at the camera and the way that he has that physical presence, that's totally what Kingpin is. So they nailed that. Colin Farrell as Bullseye. Oh my God, we're on opposite ends of the spectrum on this one, because I thought he was just completely awful. The scene where he's like in the freaking airplane next to that old woman, and he's just got this weird look on his face, and he's disgusted and he's agitated, and then he just, you know, flicks a peanut in her and just kills this random old woman on a plane. It's like, okay, man, I get it, man. You like to kill people. You're crazy. We don't know where you're coming from. We don't know any of your history. Apparently, you've never missed before, and then the one time you do miss, you get this ego problem. So, you know, I guess a 99.99% accuracy is not good enough. So I guess that's his whole motivation. So it was just so weird, because I guess he's a hired hitman, and then he just goes from place to place and decides to stay in Hell's Kitchen for some reason. I don't know, man. It just didn't make sense to me. That also contributes to the story score later, but I just felt like he was totally just in his own world in this movie, not in a good way. So that's kind of how I felt about it.
Yeah, I just love the fact that Colin Farrell was having fun. And I think in a movie that sometimes was having tonal issues, which has kind of become a theme of these early Marvel movies, I really appreciated the fact that he was having fun. And yeah, I enjoyed that. I'm giving this a slightly higher score. I'm giving this a 6.
I'm going with a 5. And it's not like I don't like Colin Farrell. I think he's a great actor. Like, I think 2 months later, like, he was at Phone Booth, And I think Phone Booth is one of those underrated, like, suspenseful movies from the tens, the 2000s. I thought it was just really well done, and he's a great performer. But just something about this role just doesn't fit. I'm worried. I'm not worried, but I'm more intrigued the fact that we got both. Both these guys, or Ben Affleck went on to become Batman, and now Colin Farrell's cast in the Batman. Not with Ben Affleck, obviously, but the rumor is that he's going to play Penguin. So it's going to be weird, man. Again, it's going back to this Daredevil movie where everyone just goes on to different things. And, Michael Clark Duncan went on to go into Green Lantern. So everyone's just kind of going on to doing something from this movie.
All right, let's get into the story and kind of the roughest part of New York City, Hell's Kitchen. There's Matt Murdock and his father. His father is a boxer. And one day, Matt gets into an industrial accident, as is common with so many of these Marvel superheroes, becomes blind after his eyes were exposed to a toxic chemical. Instead of dying, he just gets exposed and gets kind of superpowers, the ability to kind of have supernatural senses and to kind of see without seeing. I think that's the best way that I can put it. His father is killed by a mysterious figure who, of course, spoiler alert, is the Kingpin. Again, back to 1989 Batman, Brian. That's all this movie feels like it is sometimes.
Same thing, in an alleyway with a gangster, leaving a calling card, all that kind of thing. It was just, yeah, I watched that scene again and I'm just like, God damn it, why does this feel like Batman? And the fact that Affleck was in it didn't help. Again, it just bring up the weird feelings, man. But I guess that's what they were trying to do, because there was no MCU at this time. There was no Nolan trilogy to reference to. It was just all 89 Batman, 78 Superman, all that kind of thing to reference to. And then Spider-Man comes out, and then you get this weird kind of like thing where, like, okay, we have to have him do acrobatics. We have to have him jumping off shit. We have to have CGI Daredevil going from building to building. And it just throws it off. So, yeah, man, I don't know. It just, the story in this movie was just completely off, in the tone of what it should have been. It should have been more grounded. It should have been more of a criminal, crime drama like the show. And the show got it right, I think. And I think adding the $30 million, you can tell, really affected it in the wrong ways, because it made it spend all this money that it didn't need to spend.
All right, so in also covering some of the other aspects, of course, he is a lawyer by day. He is the devil by night, the devil of Hell's Kitchen. And he basically falls in love with Elektra Natchios in like a day. Natchios is the daughter of a wealthy tycoon who gets killed. She assumes that Daredevil did it when, in fact, it was Bullseye. And, of course, there's wacky miscommunication that ensues, and this leads to them fighting, and it leads to her death, and the final battle where Daredevil defeats both Bullseye as well as the Kingpin, and we're out in like an hour and 43 minutes. Just, there's a lot going on here, and it's unfortunate that the villains don't really get to be anything besides villains, and Daredevil just kind of wins. And I almost think that if you go with one character or the other, I think that works out. That would have worked out so much better.
Yeah, there's so many things going on that don't make sense. Because first of all, in the movie, you can clearly see Elektra sees Bullseye and Daredevil in like at least 20 feet ahead of her, right? And then all of a sudden she sees the thing come out and stab her dad, right? But you can clearly see that Bullseye threw it. Like she can clearly see it. Yet she somehow still assumes it was Daredevil just because it was his blade or whatever. But when you can clearly see that it was Bullseye, shit made no sense. I was like, dude, the dude like 50 feet away can clearly see was Bullseye. So that made no sense at all. And the fact that at the end, like, she stabs Daredevil in the shoulder, right? And there's this giant gaping hole coming out of him in his left shoulder, right? And then instead of like healing up or whatever, or bandaging it up really quick, he goes straight to Kingpin. And he fights Kingpin with this giant hole in his arm, and then by the end of the movie, you just forget that he got stabbed in the arm. So I was like, what the fuck is going on here? He should be bleeding out right now. Shit was just weird on the timing. Like you mentioned, they fall in love in like a week. Shit was weird, man. And then the fact that like Kingpin, I don't know, it's like they didn't even reveal like how they figured out it was going to be Kingpin, or like the cops are coming for you, Kingpin. Like, how are the cops going to know? Like, they didn't reveal anything. And why would Bullseye reveal to Daredevil that Kingpin is Fisk? It's like, it makes no sense. Like, why would you even say that? and then reveal the whole calling card with the rose. It's like, okay, we're gonna dump roses on everybody now. It's great. Now we got a calling card. Now we know exactly which bodies are related to your death, or which ones you did. Shit just made no sense by the end. I thought everything was just kind of going together fast at the end, and just everything was rushed, and it sucked by the end.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily. I did not want this movie to be longer, but it felt like they kind of needed to pick a villain and kind of go from there. And they they have the same problem as Batman, trying to shove two villains into the same movie. My score, if this is low, I'm giving this a 4.
I'm going to 4 as well, man. I just got so frustrated by the end because I just felt like nothing made sense, and like Daredevil should be bleeding out right now, and just all kinds of weird stuff. And yeah, I guess we got to mention the priest. I don't know, man. I guess he called the cops on him, and I don't know. Shit was weird at that last scene because everything was just kind of rushed. But whatever.
All right, let's get to the technical aspects. I think this movie is way too glossy. I think it's got a very early 2000s soundtrack that I think is very problematic, and just a lot of weird camera shots in CGI that hasn't aged well. You have to attribute some of that to the fact that it's 2003. I did like the blind effect. I'm not sure how it's aged. I think it's mostly aged pretty well. And I did appreciate that what they were going for, and that you could see what Daredevil was seeing. And I think there are a couple of moments. And Brian, I'm going to let you talk about the suit because I know this is kind of your thing. But I think kind of going for this Batman-ish feel, I don't think was necessarily the best idea. Daredevil is kind of Batman anyway. And there were just a lot of visual cues that were on the close side.
Yeah, it just felt like they were just trying to emulate that. I did not like the look of his apartment building. It looked like some kind of like S&M kind of like dungeon or something. And the fact that he's sleeping in like this weird like isolation tank, I guess to drown out the noise. But in the show, like he has no problem isolating noises and sounds, right? But I don't know. It's just it's weird how like they made that like his major weakness, and it's so obvious how to beat him. Yet I don't know, Colin Farrell or Bullseye or whatever couldn't like just beat him when he was just like in the weakest part, and you know what I mean, just like freaking out with the sounds. But I'm glad they cut that shit out for the show because it made him too vulnerable, I think. And then I don't know. I like the suit, except I just didn't like the way that like it at night it looked, I don't know, maybe too dark. Maybe it need to be a little bit brighter. But then I kind of compare it to the show again, and it's like they didn't even do the full suit until the end of season 1. It was just weird, the look. And the lighting I mentioned in this movie is just kind of weird. Some of it's brightly lit, some of it's really too darkly lit. And then the CGI, I didn't like the CGI at all. Like when you got Daredevil doing all these acrobatic backflips and all this stupid shit, just make it more grounded. Like I wanted more of like, I guess I'm just spoiled, but that scene in like, I think it was episode 1 of season 1 of Daredevil where he's just beating everyone up in that hallway in that single shot take. And there was like no fucking like backflips or high spots or anything like that. So, you know what I mean? I wanted more of a grounded take, and then realizing now like that extra $30 million with the success of Spider-Man did not help at all. And I can clearly tell that they were going for more of that Spider-Man feel. And it just didn't work. And I didn't like the fact that they made Affleck's hair like this. I don't know what it is, but did you notice they add this like tint of red in his hair just to make it like subtle nod to the
It looked like he was wearing a toupee. It was bizarre.
And it almost looked like the same toupee that he was wearing from the scene in Jay and Bob Strike Back where he was like, applesauce, bitch. But yeah, maybe that's just the way his hair is naturally puffed out and he's just a magical movie star. But it was just weird that they did all these little things, you know what I mean? And some of the stuff looked realistic and some of it looked too comic-y, and they couldn't find that balance. And then again, like the Thor movie that I mentioned months ago or a year ago almost, where they just tilt the camera and make it this weird angle where like one side of the camera is tilted, the other's like fine. It's just weird. Like you don't have to do that. Just make it a normal looking movie and don't try to make it look like a comic book.
Right. Did you give your score?
5 for me. I was just really disappointed. And the soundtrack again, it's just the byproduct of its time. And I realized, man, I was listening to all that music on the local K-Rock station, but a lot of that shit doesn't age well. Give or take Evanescence. Like I did appreciate the funeral scene. That was one of the few scenes I like with the music, only because it reminded me of the WWE. Because around this time they were using that for all their tribute videos for when the legends died. And I remember specifically, and I looked it up, They used it for Classy Freddie Blassie when he died in 2003. So that's how I remembered it.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. I am also giving this a 5 for many of the same reasons that you stated. I think there were definitely some nice shots. There were some individual things that worked, but my goodness, some of this simply did not, and it's really unfortunate. And I think the way that I kind of come down this movie is almost like right down the middle. I don't think that this is ultimately either Pantheon worthy or Pile of Shame worthy. I think this is exactly down the middle, and I think my legacy score also reflects that. I give this a 4 because I think in a lot of ways we will remember the Netflix show, probably the best of the 4, except for the first season of Jessica Jones. But I think the 3 seasons of Daredevil will be remembered in a much more positive light. And I think this movie has kind of been forgotten. Disney actually owns this movie now because it is a 20th Century Fox title. I think people remember this more for Ben Affleck's subsequent rehab trip and his relationship with Jennifer Garner. This is also at a time period when Ben Affleck was starting to make a lot of bombs, including a movie called Paycheck. Yes, Ben Affleck literally did a movie called Paycheck in what is almost self-parody at this point, but he actually did it, and it's really fascinating. And there is the director's cut of this movie, I think, almost has a better legacy because I think it is at least slightly better. And the sequel, quote unquote, to this movie, which is Elektra, is one of the worst comic book movies that has ever been made. So for all those reasons, a 4.
I'm going to go a little slightly higher. I'm going to go with a 6 just because, like, all these different things kind of go back to this movie, the Daredevil legacy. And then it's kind of weird with the timing of this episode, but there's been some internet rumors going around. I don't know if you've been following, but we mentioned that you could probably put Charlie Cox in, the MCU and maybe as Spider-Man's lawyer. And there's rumors going around that, yeah, it's probably going to happen where Charlie Cox is going to get not only just appear in the Spider-Man franchise as his lawyer, but eventually get his own movie in the next 4 or 5 years, which I think would be interesting, considering all the connection stuff. And then the fact that Favreau, probably took this experience and used it to not make the same mistakes and go on to do Iron Man 5 years later. I think that probably helped a lot. And then the Elektra thing, yeah, but also in a Hollywood kind of way, this led to Ben Affleck marrying Jennifer Garner, right? And the whole thing with that saga, which kind of led to him going on to do Batman. There's a lot of things that kind of like domino affected from this movie that you can't really ignore. And then we mentioned like Michael Clark Duncan going on to do Green Lantern, another comic book property. So everything kind of fully comes together. Kevin Smith is in this movie. Just a lot of random people in this movie that went on to do different things and all these different crazy castings. So, and then of course, like I mentioned, Evanescence. The 2 songs that are known for Evanescence are in this movie, and they are on the soundtrack. So a lot of history, man, for the right or wrong reasons, I think. So it's going to be a 6 out of 10 for me. A little bit of like a negative kind of a score, but in a way it's kind of like, well, this movie's kind of down the line, like you mentioned, but a lot of history came from it.
Yeah, Evanescence, I guess, not a one-hit wonder, kind of a 2-hit wonder, and both of their hits were in this movie.
Exactly, and sometimes that's the way you're remembered. So that song is still, both those songs I think are still played on the local K-Rock station.
I believe a WWE pay-per-view at the time used one of the songs.
Yeah, it was all over the place. So thank you.
And
Kevin
the weird thing is, I think it was right around the same time this movie was out. I feel like it was like a No Way Out or something that was in the month of February. And this movie did come out in February of 2003, Valentine's Day, if you can believe it. I took my girlfriend at the time to see Daredevil. And incredibly, she did not break up with me immediately afterward, even though that's probably what I deserved.
At least you didn't watch the director's cut then?
All right, I gave this a 24.
26 from me. It's weird that we were like totally opposite on like the Colin Farrell stuff, but the legacy stuff I kind of, I guess evened it out with that because, I felt like it's got a weird legacy that kind of counts.
For sure. Let's get to the burning questions, and what a set of burning questions we have. We agree Ben Affleck should never do a superhero movie again, right?
Listen, man, I love him as fucking Batman. I don't know what to say. If he wants to do Dark Knight Returns in 10 years, then I'm all for it. And if Michael Keaton doesn't want to do it, because there is a big clamoring to do that. and I think both actors are at the right age to do it. But if Affleck is gonna just become an alcoholic again, then it's not worth it.
No, it is certainly not. I am with you on this. Ben Affleck should never be in a superhero movie ever again. All right, let's get to this. This is good. Michael Clark Duncan, underrated Kingpin. I say yes. I think Vincent D'Onofrio is very good, but let's give some props.
Yeah, like I said, he's got the physicality down to a T with this role. Like it's almost perfect casting. I just picture him saying the stuff that D'Onofrio was saying in the Daredevil seasons 1 through 3, and it's like he would have killed it, I think. And I think, especially with like a certain direction and tone and like a tone change, it would have been even better with this character. Like I think both are the right kind of choice for the role. D'Onofrio's just a little bit older, but it was crazy, man. Because I still remember Michael Clark Duncan working at Whole Foods and just like the amount of meat that he would buy on every trip with Omarosa for like the year that I was back in his grocery. It's just crazy, man. The fact that he died and Omarosa came and dressed in black. I mentioned this story before, but it was just surreal. But the fact that, you mentioned his weight and the fact that he gained even more weight, I totally see the results all these years or the years later afterwards. So.
All right, Jennifer Garner, born 10 years too soon?
10 years too soon. I don't know, man, maybe because I don't know, like she would be perfect for like, I don't know, like a young the Florence Pugh role in the MCU right now, like that kind of role. So maybe so, man, but I don't know. I did like her in 13 going on 30. So that might be with the one few roles that she was in the lead in that was pretty decent. So
yeah, it's pretty bananas to think that she could be in the MCU right now if she was 10 years younger, and maybe she should still be in some form or fashion, but it's just really unfortunate. What's the most important thing Jon Favreau learned from this movie?
I would probably say tone, because I think he figured out the right tone in his head, and that's why his performance, I think, was the best out of all of them. And he just figured out, okay, this is a comic book movie, but don't take it too comic-y. Make it funny and relatable, because everything he was saying was just fucking like, okay, this is like MCU stuff right here. But I think that's just what he learned, and then he figured out and applied it to the Iron Man movie. Because that, I mean, as we know, the Iron Man movie has the perfect tone for what that movie should be, and all because of Favreau knew what to do with it.
Absolutely, I think that is certainly the case, and that's a really good answer that I'm going to have a hard time topping, and I'm just not. I'm going to support everything that you just said and say that I think that the tone of the MCU is where they've done the best. I think you watch some of these earlier movies, and in a way, I think some of the way they shoot it and some of the individual visual moments, I think, are better. But I think the tone of the MCU has just been done right from the start. And I think you have to give Jon Favreau a lot of the credit, since he's the one who directed Iron Man, then directed Iron Man 2. And even though he has not been a creative influencer, he has been a part of the MCU for about 10 years or so. And I think you've got to give him a lot of the credit for that. And I think that's really, really important to think about as you think about the MCU as is currently constructed. It's good stuff. So let's get to the fifth and final question. What did Joey Pants do with the paycheck from this movie?
I'm gonna guess he got a new Apple iMac, the ones that had the different colors. You remember those? Like the neon blue, the neon purple. I think there was a white one. Probably got one of those, and then probably got, I don't know, for his kids, maybe like an extension where you can plug in a GameCube into it like we did in middle school back in the day. Something like that. You know what I mean? It was an iMac colorful generation at the time.
I am going to go out on a limb and say that he got himself some earrings, because if you notice in this movie, he is wearing some shiny earrings, and you can see that also in The Matrix. So I'm going to say he bought himself some nice earrings, and I'm telling you, Brian, right now that we will be talking about Sam Elliott next week and what he did with the paycheck from Ghost Rider.
Oh, God. Ghost Rider. I've been kind of dreading it. It's just that I remember, I think it was when I was working at Blockbuster, my coworker put it on, and just something about Nick Cage's performance, man, it can really either draw you in and like a fucking, like you're in, like for me was like with Kick-Ass with him, or like, his famous roles like leaving Las Vegas or whatever. But man, I don't know. I don't know. It's just really hit or miss with Nick Cage sometimes.
I really like Nicolas Cage when he's trying, but man, there are just sometimes he's not, and I'm not looking forward to reviewing both Ghost Riders on the podcast next week as we are concluding the month of March. Brian, it's been a long year, and we're only through 3 months of it.
Yeah, I mean, depending on when you're listening to this, you could be either freaking out or being relieved right now. But we're all in this together, apparently, and despite all the shit that's going around, literally, figuratively, scientifically, through nature or whatever, we can only get through it together. So that's all I can say. So
the one positive thing is that Brian and I can do this podcast remotely, and I don't have to deal with his germy hands after doing laundry. So that's good.
Yes, I do work at a hotel, and I do deal with the dirty linen and the dirty, not their clothes, but the sheets and the towels and stuff. But I swear to God, I always use gloves, and that's the rule. And it would be disgusting for me not to, because I am disgusted at some of the shit I see in some of these linen anyway. So, and I'm dealing with that, but hopefully we can just get through it, like I said. And I'm going to use extra bleach.
For sure. I am in a very fortunate position. I work on a college campus. Now, college campuses are petri dishes for illness, as you probably know. But thankfully, I will be able to work from home. All of my students will be able to take the rest of their classes online. And I'm just really relieved to be able to do that. I'm also relieved that we're going to be able to continue doing this podcast as long as we both have internet access and neither one of us gets seriously ill. I will be forever grateful for that, because I think this is going to get us through some pretty insane times. And I would imagine that we will probably not be reviewing Black Widow. I think there's a possibility that we may not review Wonder Woman this summer. So I think people are just going to kind of have to prepare for a very different summer movie season, and the very real possibility that a lot of movie theaters are going to shut down in these next couple months, because it's going to be really, really difficult.
Yeah, it's going to be a crazy, crazy time, but there are thousands of movies in the archive in the history of Hollywood, so I think we'll be fine in terms of figuring out what to watch in the meantime. But Hollywood will bounce back. You know what I mean? It's a safety precaution, and let's face it, they don't want to lose money when they release a theater when no one's in the theater, so that's also the reason they don't want to release it. So,
of course, and I am very, very glad that we'll be able to do that. And I don't know about you, Brian, but I'm going to have some extra time on my hands, so there's a rewatch that I know you're very excited to do, and we may tackle that rewatch earlier than you expected with all this extra time.
Yes, and it's X-Men the animated series, man. We've been talking about it for a while, but I've been craving to kind of go through it. To kind of go through it, to kind of avoid it, I've been watching Spider-Man episodes to kind of like, because if I start watching the X-Men episodes, I'm gonna have to watch it in order again and get sucked in and all the drama and all the space drama and all that kind of thing. But yeah, man, I know you've been DMing me and you seem kind of hooked already again. So
yes, I've been trying to watch through Breaking Bad, and have not necessarily been in as much of a mood to doing that. So that's why I am making my way through the X-Men. But we want to thank you for your continued support and definitely getting through these times. And we know that you have a lot of extra time on your hands, so definitely make sure you are checking out the other podcasts on this feed to help keep your sanity. And Brian and I are going to do what we can to get through this. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
Did you notice that scene where they just said Matt and Ben right back to back, but it was like Ben Affleck saying Matt and the other dude saying Ben?